start? Okay. Yeah. So yeah. Bennett is very he yeah. We read his well when I read part of the whatever it was with you, the Wealth of Nations. Yeah, we read him.
Yes.
Yeah. So I
Um,
have both pulled up. I have the academic whatever Cambridge version. Uh,
yeah, and I had both. I
and
was also going through
and
kind of
the
just making sure and spot checking the that I wasn't like missing some grand narrative, you know.
yeah, no, he's just very long-winded. Uh, and has
Which
long
one?
fucking sentences. So
Who?
Kant.
Oh, yeah. He's an
Yeah,
awful writer.
he is very terrible
He's
at writing.
awful writer.
It is
And
kind of like I don't know. I mean, like with a lot of things, you get kind of used to it, and then you can kind of start feeling. I could feel his excitement this time reading it. I was like, oh, he's excited right now.
oh yeah, he's super like he was been itching to. It's like he was in jail and writing his mixtape,
I mean,
and
that's
he just got out.
almost what he was doing. He spent
Really
like 10 years writing this book or something like that.
interesting.
It was a while. Yep.
Interesting. And it's a short book.
Oh. Okay. Well, I mean, he spent 10 years writing the Critique of Pure Reason, and then this is I guess
Hey,
well,
fuckers. I spent all this time writing the shit and you didn't understand it.
yeah. Let me kind of like lay it out for you in quickly without having to go through all even the more other long-winded long winds.
Are there any? I assume some of this also has to be addendums, but it sounds like if he thinks it's the way he describes laying out a complete system, right? He can't. He has to almost have a little dogmatism, right? Even though he says he doesn't have dogmatism in here.
Yes, I mean he has not he doesn't have metaphysical dogmatism because he doesn't ground his metaphysics in metaphysics. He grounds it in something else, which is the laws of pure reason. But yes, he
which
doesn't
is
have
a
a,
which is a metaphysic,
well, that's I guess gonna
or an
be
ethic, moral system.
I guess we can argue about this.
Wait, hold on. Oh, question.
Yeah,
Wait, Kant did the categorical imperative, right?
Kant. Yeah, yes, he did.
Was that in the Critique of Pure Reason?
No. There's he has three critiques. I don't remember I never looked at the other two. Uh,
I'm surprised that because that would seem very interesting to me.
yeah.
Whatever work has
So,
that in it.
um, God. Okay. I should have looked at this before. Yeah, we have the critique of pure reason, which is really what most people care about. Critique of practical reason, and the critique of the power of judgment, which is his. Uh,
Groundwork of the introduced in the groundwork of metaphysics of morals.
yeah.
Is this before or after?
Oh, it's definitely after the critique of pure reason. It's supposed to be kind of like so. So I guess the way the ordering of the construction of one of these systems
Seventeen hundreds.
is that you do
God,
what?
sorry, I saw the number. I forgot we're not even in the 1800s yet.
Nope.
Like so fucking long ago.
Yeah. So yeah. So the first you have to do is you have to do well. We haven't quite gotten to it, but you have to concern yourself with the grounds of metaphysical propositions, like how it is that you're making metaphysical propositions and arguments. Um, and then like what grounds them, what are their sources? You want to be talking about that, which is metaphysics, I guess if you want to call it that. Um, and then and so he ends up saying what metaphysics is just all types of claims that are and he says it in this a priori synthetic using both concepts and intuitions. Um,
Concepts, yeah,
yeah.
and intuitions. And he
Whereas
breaks those into three. I have it here. Um, judgment from experience, mathematic judgments, and metaphysical judgments. Right?
Yeah.
What's the
Well,
total?
yes. So, okay. So, well, he was just trying to, yeah, he was trying to block, he was trying to like chisel out what section of what types of cognition metaphysics does. Because he's obviously metaphysics is a priori cognition, but he wants to distinguish it from mathematics. Uh,
And what he says about how about mathematics is very interesting.
it is.
Um, distinction. He says, I can figure out that 7 plus 5 equals 12 in my head, and nothing I find in experience can possibly contradict that knowledge. And it's posteriori. Mathematics
A,
is
yeah, a
a
posteriori.
paradigmatic example of a priori knowledge. So it was such an interesting thought, right?
Yeah.
And it did make me think about, and the gold example, which comes out a lot in philosophy, or I'm going to say instead of metaphysics, I think metaphilosophy.
Well, what he's eventually going to call it is transcendental philosophy.
Transcendental. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So transcendental.
Yeah.
And so, if I understand it right, what we're talking about is um, being careful not to smuggle in, um, and not to smuggle one as in the other, right? Whereas I could say, well, logically, I come to the conclusion that 7 plus 5 is 12 based on the evidence and the, what is laid out before me. But it's already in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. I mean,
and I'm not going to be able to be like, if somebody comes up to me with let's say they have a critique for math and it's actually a critique for math. I don't think somebody would be able to argue me off of it if they were just a person who walked by me on the street.
yeah.
Like, I'm just going to accept it a priori, right?
So yeah. So a fun thing. So like the example 7 plus 5 is very. I guess it's like people can get all up in arms about it because you're like, well, obviously 7 plus 5 is 12. Like what it could be nothing else at all. Like anytime I think of 7 plus 12, I just have to think. I mean, 7 plus 5, I have to think of 12. Well, and then so you think about you have the concept of 7, you have the concept of 5, and the concept of the union of the two, and then just it's really only because we're so familiar with those small numbers, and also because they are small numbers that we it's well on the one hand yes and that it's so easy to think of the number 12, and then yes also it is necessary that 12 is the sum of 7 and 5, but then when you start thinking about fucking big numbers like 1,286,005 plus 560,292, like what the sum of those two numbers are, you don't just you can't I'm not unless you like are very proficient in basic arithmetic operations. Um, you're not gonna just think of what the sum of those two things are. You're gonna have to do the number counting thing. You're gonna have to go through some type of like way of really oh yeah going through the well according to him you'd have to go through you have to use your concepts of the two numbers and then reach out and touch the intuitions was the word he had of what the I guess what those numbers are. So we have the concept of the numbers, and then there's the intuition of what those numbers are, and you have to reach outside of the concept and I guess grasp the intuition
I think
in your whole
if we
proposition.
leave small numbers, we're going to lose the concept,
Well,
or
okay.
the conversation. I think if you were, so I found two other examples, right?
Mm-hmm.
In commentary online. Um, so there was and this might have been in this section there, right? The all bachelors are unmarried, um, right, is also a priori.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the way it was described is and I don't know if this is getting too much ahead, um, but the knowledge of all flamingos are white.
Uh-huh.
That is not intuitive, but it is correct. Um,
All
and
flamingos
it's
are white.
synthetic. Yeah. Or all swans are white.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, sorry.
Well, you can also. Well,
It's
that's
it's
fine.
synthetic, even though generally we think of white animals, we think of swans. It could be said that to understand a swan is without knowing that it is white. Um, fuck. I thought it was flamingos. I'm retarded.
Yeah, I mean, I think I get so yeah. So you have the two different like so even though something like flamingos or swans only ever appear in experience, so the content of the concept is um is empirical, but the type of the judgment, which is that all swans are white or all flamingos are pink. The I guess the you could say the generation of the judgment is analytic because the concept, well, in concept word in world, white is already contained in the concept of swan, and so I don't actually have to go. Once I already have the concept, I don't have to go into experience to generate to create that judgment. I can just think it already.
Right. You're not synthesizing anything.
No, no, no,
Um,
no.
you're
Yep.
you're not. Nothing is
Well,
being.
yeah,
You're not. Um,
yeah, yes. Yes, you are not synthesizing anything. You have your concept that's in your head, and you pull the predicate out of the concept and just say that
right.
it is that.
Exactly how he said it. Right. Yeah.
It is not ampliative. It is explicative or whatever.
Amplitive. Not a
Ampliative.
Marshall
No,
or like a Fender. So,
no.
so this was in the commentary. This was a little bit better. He's arguing essentially that the concept of 7 plus 5 is the union of the concept of 7, quote unquote, 5, quote unquote, and the concept of addition. None of these three concepts, in and of themselves, contain the concept of 12. It is a new concept that arises from the synthesis of the three subject concepts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it is also the other thing important you have to remember, I guess, yeah, that so the type the source of the judgment is totally a priori. Yeah. So our types of judgments are analytic or synthetic, and our sources of judgments are a posteriori or a priori, because they're the source of that synthesis is all done using intuition. Well, I should say pure intuition because eventually that matters.
Can we pause? If it's a priority, I don't want to misuse that word because it's really important because it's being used in context. The way I always, and maybe I'm just using it wrong, a priori was just like, I feel it. I know it. It was just something that it's like, why is murder bad? That I would always say that, or at least I would say traditionally that
Yeah, I
a
mean,
priori
yeah,
killing is a bad because it feels bad. I don't want to die, so I don't want to kill someone else, so they die. Right? There's no like, I didn't like. It's just a feeling, right? Like how most morals are, right?
mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. So it's in the ballpark.
I'm
So
not going like me minus. I'm not like mathematically getting there. I'm not. But
yeah,
in the
yeah.
definition, okay. So it says knowledge which proceeds from theoretical deduction
Well,
rather than observation or experience. But that is confusing to me in the dictionary definition.
yeah. So, um, a priori, I guess, is a source. It's a at least well here in Kant, it's a source. Yeah, a source of judgment, and it is either from experience or from not experience. So you could say that, yeah, like similar, like just the proposition that murder is bad. In a way, you could say that it is a priori because, like, the source of that feeling you didn't ever like experience murder in some way or another, and then discover like, lo and behold, it was bad. Like
Right.
I had oxtail today for the first time, and I didn't know how it was gonna go. I wasn't like I wasn't running into it with the idea that, you know, Oxtail's good or bad. I just was like, let's see what this is about. Um,
Right.
yeah. So yes, in a way, yeah, you could say that. Yeah, murder is bad, and I think definitely Kant would agree with you. But I don't know. If, well, Hume obviously wouldn't. But that's beside the point. Um, I mean, yeah. So basically, was it derived? Was it sourced from experience or was it from not experience? And clearly, you've never actually had experience of murder.
That's what you think.
That is what I think. So for the sake of argument here, I mean, a lot of people, most people have that same feeling, and most people haven't.
Most people don't murder.
Or yeah, or see murder, or have murder attempted on them, or be murdered and die and get resuscitated. Um,
Can you? Let's not joke too far close to the sun because we'll never get back to the book. All right. So now that I understand a priori, right?
yeah, yeah,
In its fullest.
yeah. And so you also get the similarity between saying that murder is bad is a priori and 7 + 5 is 12. That is also a priori, right?
So you would almost say intuit.
Yes, literally, actually, yes, yeah. The what he said for mathematics is that it is literally the principle. So like something like where analytic judgments are all based off the principle of contradiction or really non-contradiction. All of the principle that grounds all mathematical concepts is pure intuition, or I should say mathematical judgments is pure intuition, and then later he gets to metaphysics, which is pure intuition and pure concepts.
As
Yeah.
time goes on,
Mm-hmm.
I slowly start to understand, even though I read none of it, the Hegel spirit, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
in so far as because if we were to talk about right now, me and you would both agree there's no objective morality, meaning it isn't written in a book. But if you were to ask me about anything, I don't think you would. I think it would all be intuitive and, beyond like abortion. Just let's talk about if we were just talking about murder and stuff like that and chopping off my arms. Everything would almost be intuitive and wouldn't be able to. I wouldn't be able to be argued off of it. So it is objective to me. Well, I guess that's subjective. Never mind. Shit, I just went in a circle. All right. Fuck morals.
Yeah. So there's
I need to.
well,
That's a half baked thought. Sorry.
that's fine. Um, I guess it's not really worth bringing up Hegel yet for what it's gonna.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's. But all I'm saying is that there's so much to everything builds on the other thing. So
Yeah.
like all of Russell is helping me better understand Kant. Is helping.
Oh yes, actually, this is something I definitely wanted to bring up with you, which is, do you see the similarity between Kant and Russell? Because there is even though, Russell was very much against we had that conversation about the being and being known, but, and generally speaking, Russell will go, I disagree with Kant on particular things, but there's a huge, like, the main.
Insofar as.
Oh, well, he disagrees on the point that the knower affects the known. Where we talked about that, where like Russell doesn't think that simply because
He does reject the idealism trope, doesn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
He doesn't. He dislikes that.
Yeah.
Pretty. For someone who doesn't take a lot of hard stances on things, it's a pretty hard stance.
Yeah.
The way he said it.
Yes, which Kant will be in a similar kind of idealist camp that Russell opposes, but their main concern is largely with how the fuck are we even saying things in metaphysics at all? And if you like recall, the majority of logical atomism up until the last 2 pages was not metaphysics. Actually, there was no metaphysics in that. Right at the end, it was all this kind of how do we?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's
Yep. I understand what you're saying now, right? It's how do we talk about what? It's like a meta, right?
Yep.
Obviously, is you guys have, and that's kind of what I alluded to in the beginning, and I think this happens. It's impossible to get away from without purposely stopping yourself and other people. Is the smuggling in of premises that you don't really know are there, but
Mm-hmm.
because so much is intuitive that we skip a lot of steps, right? And that's what goes back to, even, is metaphysics solvable? Because how can we know when we're at the smallest item, which is Russell's? And we talked about that, right? How can we know that we've divided things by the smallest piece of items
Yeah, yeah, it is
or
kind
the
of the
atom?
problem with Russell to talk about simples, which really I think one problem that happens in Russell is that he does it. It feels a lot like he's sneaking in a metaphysical entity called a logical simple into his, I guess, probably speaking, transcendental or pre-metaphysics philosophy.
Well, I think that's probably a product of the time period that math, logic, symbols are all big topics at that time period.
Mm-hmm,
If I'm not wrong,
mm-hmm.
so he's kind of piggybacking on all of that. Um, I think,
Yeah, I mean,
or to an extent.
I guess he just kind of has to admit that he has to think that they're there because it kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Because, well, what he wants to do is he wants to be able to talk about sets, or really types and classes, and the way that you know concepts are put together, or really, I guess, abstracted from a class. And so when you start talking about like, oh well, these like all
Were those even words
I'm trying
back
to make in
then?
words. So like you see like this is an I can
I meant
point
back then. I'm sorry, not you. My
what?
fault.
Oh,
I was talking about back then. Not I wasn't saying. Are you saying words? I
yeah, I
meant,
thought
like,
you were making fun of me.
were those words he even had access to back then, right? Sets and classes, or was he
Yeah.
using terms stand-in to those terms?
No, no, no. He was using sets and classes. Yep, those
Okay,
were yeah. Yeah, set
sorry.
theory was going. It's a mid to late like 19th century thing in math that they were trying to do to figure out the foundations of calculus, um, and they were all upset when Russell came found out figured out his paradox because it kind of fucked everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he definitely had the sets, and he explicitly used the words classes and types. Um, but he does kind of. So I guess he accidentally kind of sneaks in, yeah, an entity in there, which is the logical simple. Um, I guess I guess he wants to try to say somehow or another that it's really a transcendental entity, which I don't know if that makes. I don't think that makes any sense. Because you're supposed to be able to sort of experience them, right? Uh, like somehow or another, somewhere in this keyboard is the smallest logical symbol of the color gray or whatever. Somewhere in there.
But I would never be able to point to it, or you wouldn't, right?
No, and that's what's very annoying. Is that he keeps wanting to say about like, oh, like names. I can name the keyboard. I can talk about it, and then you can start putting different things that you can name into sets, and then that's where you start getting like, oh well, this the set of all these things that I pointed at. This is what black things are, and then I pointed at these things, and this is what red things are, and I pointed at these things, and this is what smelly things are. But we never really actually point to like, oh, look at this patch of gray and that patch of gray, and this patch of gray and that patch of gray, and we're all gonna call this a keyboard. It doesn't really piecemeal like that. I could see how you could say that like the concept of black kind of happens that way, or like loud things, or I don't know, gross things, or scary things. You can kind of start thinking that like you can start making an utterance towards things that have a certain intuitive similarity, and then other people pick up on your pattern of associating that like intuition of the experience with a certain sound, and then you've now abstracted a word from the experiences. But I don't think anybody ever goes like, oh, like these gray things and these great things and puts them together. That doesn't happen. But whatever.
Wait, I don't, you I was following all the way to the end when you started abstracting. What
Oh,
w-
so like, uh, so I guess for example, like, it's a lot of like, so like, I guess if you think of like, I guess maybe, primitive language. So like, I guess bunnies or whatever, they'll like hit the ground when they'll like hit the ground with their feet. They'll stomp the ground when they see predators or whatever. And I guess at some point or another, as a young bunny, you kind of start to, on the one hand, not just figure out that people run away when there's a thumping on the ground, but that there is like a snake, and there's a wolf, and there's a fox, and there's a kid with a 22 or whatever. And so to some extent, you put all these things into a set of, they have a commonality, and they're associated with this, like, this thumping.
Danger.
Yeah, and that's more or less equivalent to, like, this literally just is danger. And so similarly, like, you can go, like, you're looking at some things, and somebody goes, blah, and you see another thing, you go, blah, and blah.
Blarg.
Blah. Yeah, blarg.
Let's use
sure, yeah.
not retarded sounds.
Yeah, I go,
you
blarg.
just put letters. Yes, put letters together.
Yes, blarg, blarg. And then, different people start to recognize the pattern of when you say blarg and in the things that you're pointing at. So you can start coming up with, like, I guess, if you want to call them universals or whatever. So we can start getting, like, which is just that black is like a universal, or blarg is, because it's just a thing that is common to many particulars. But then, so sure, I can get that. So what's nice about that is that you have things that you can designate with a variable, and you can put them into a big set and say, oh, this whole set, we're going to designate this whole set by the word blarg.
I'm following.
And that works. But the problem is that I guess it gets difficult when you also try to describe this keyboard, or really I'd say actually any particular, as this set. So in a similar way where you said the concept black was just all these things that are black, now I'm going to say, well, all the, this keyboard is just itself a collection of variables. Well, a collection of things that are pointed to by variables.
But we would say a keyboard is, so, I mean, it's, there are, so are you saying that because there are many types of keyboards, some have letters, some have Chinese characters, right? Some don't have keys, right? Because of that, because we can't point to there is the keyboard exactly, and it's got ambiguity, I guess what's the challenge?
No, so I'm going. So instead of talking about the universal, the color black, or even the universal keyboard, like these are all keyboards, I'm not like being able to point out and say that this keyboard that I'm looking at is made up of, this and this variable x that points to this blotch of gray, and this variable y that points to this blotch of gray, and this variable z that points to this blotch of white, and we notice that they're like trying to say that the keyboard is just this set of items gets very difficult. You can talk about keyboards in general, actually. It makes more sense to me, at least, because you can go, I pointed out all these things, and what they have in common is being a keyboard, or whatever. They are all blarg. But trying to say that the actual object of my experience is constituted of logical symbols that are picked out with variables is very weird. And I think that idea kind of just sneaks its way in prematurely.
I think he talks about that, right? That a lot of this is shorthand, right? Mm-hmm. That the first person keyboard is this keyboard here is shorthand for this keyboard that is only, whatever it is, 62 keys. 30 keys, and is mostly off white, right? Like, and it, there's a lot of things I'm not including. It's making up things that are sets.
Yeah, I mean, and he does talk about that the actual, like the actual logical simple is really an inferred entity. They don't. It's really hard to pin down the fact that we like any actual experience of them, which is kind of a little loosey-goosey on his end. It bothers me that he's like putting so much emphasis on this thing, but then also saying, "Hey, I kind of don't really. We're just making them up." I don't know.
Yeah, I gave him a big pass. I think it was his age, right? Isn't he like super young when he writes it? And then he does like a shit ton of work to like amend those statements. So like, at least from what I remember, it was kind of his first pass at X, right? Or at taking on this
Um,
process.
well, at least of
Was it not?
applying the whole like, I guess philosophy of or like of using sets as the foundation of our language and pulling that over to philosophy was the first time he'd done this.
Right.
It's where he
He's
had tried.
done other works. Obviously, he wasn't. Yeah,
Well,
he wasn't get good.
yeah, he had tried doing it before this. I believe was in Principia Mathematica, where he does it only for math. Um, which is interesting now that we're talking about where Kant is going to talk about the difference between um, math, pure math, and philosophy or metaphysics. And then Russell ended up doing. He ended up using his, I guess you want to call it, transcendental philosophy to approach trying to find the ground of mathematics, trying to find the the fundamental ground of mathematics, and proving that what he had was sufficient to ground mathematics. And then he moved on to moving on to philosophy. Now, a large part of him moving on to philosophy was because Wittgenstein read a bunch of Russell's and Frege's stuff and was like, "Hey, we can use this in regular language." And then Russell was like, "Oh yeah, we can."
Yeah, and I think that he kind of like me in like a like the stars are aligning and he's seeing everything coming together. It's literally uh, a note. It's an annotation of a lecture, right? It's not like a um, hey, I sat down and wrote. Well, I guess he did, but anyways, I'm making some leaps. But it felt like I definitely know he amends it afterwards. So
Yeah.
so I give him a lot of credit there. It's quite a fucking well put together system. It's hard to.
Oh, it's very good. It's ingenious. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. Anyway, so
So synthetic judgments. Um, oh, and then so back then, I do like his kind of again meta talking about how much of a science can philosophy be if no one can agree, which is something that um, Russell hits on, right?
yeah.
Well, I guess by the time Russell gets around, philosophy is starting to fade, or no?
You could argue that it's degenerated into kind of a sort of theology where basically you had Kant and you had and then about I don't know what,
Hegelites.
and then you have Hegel, and then Hegel just completely, well, almost completely just
Hegel's
bombards
like
all
the
of
Michael
philosophy.
Jackson of
Yes,
fucking.
he moonwalks on everybody, and then everybody becomes, you know, uh, traumatized from childhood, and except for it kind of bothers me that there's also these people like Mill that existed after Hegel, but wasn't. I mean, Mill doesn't seem Hegelian at all. I'm not being sarcastic. I just said that kind of weird. Um, but he also definitely seems very wrong in a lot of respects. But whatever. But yeah, I mean, so most of what Russell is bothered with when he's complaining is with the British idealists, which are basically the British version of Hegel, which is I was trying to get into with Bradley, and then we gave up on that. Um, yeah, where and there was another thing I was going to try to get at, which was well, I wanted to read, which was G. E. Moore's Refutation of Idealism, which I started reading, um, in which he mainly argues against the point that being is to be perceived, or to be is to be perceived, which I guess is a really big tenet of idealism in the 19th century. Um, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I don't know
Oh,
enough.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Um, oh, I lost it. Fuck. Um, question. I could therefore take sure, if still always slow, step towards finally determining completely and accordingly to universal. Okay, yeah, this is a this was a great sentence and a dogshit sentence at the same time. According to universal principles, the entire extent of pure reason with regards to its boundaries as well as its content, which was indeed the very thing that metaphysics requires in order to build its system according to a sure plan.
Can you say it again?
My God. Yeah, I know, right? I could therefore take sure, if still always slow, step towards finally determining, completely and according to universal principles, the entire extent of pure reason with regard to its boundaries as well as its content, which was indeed the very thing that metaphysics requires in order to build its system according to their sure plan. That was one sentence.
Yeah.
Fucking brutal.
Yeah. There's some doozies in this book, dude.
Knowing X about the world without experiencing it. Uh, oh, that's what it was. I went through Bonovec. I went through and watched his original video on critique of pure reason.
Yep.
That's where that came from.
Gotcha. So,
only from the whole can a complete member derived. If you control F for that.
Oh yeah, so that was an interesting one.
Yes.
Yeah, where you're supposed to, you can only actually ever do this from. Okay, yeah, the purpose of any member of pure reason can be derived only from the complete concept of the whole. Which is makes me feel very similar. It feels very similar to a Hegel type of deal, where you only move somewhere with entire concepts, and then at some point you kind of have to just kind of pick at it, and it really doesn't even so the problem with with trying to read something that whose whole purpose can only be derived from understanding the whole concept, that the first time you read it you don't know the whole concept, so there's literally no way you can understand it the first time, which is rather peculiar. It makes me wonder how much Kant and Hegel are actually alike in their presentational methodology. I really don't know. Whereas, where I both definitely Hegel's like, he literally wrote it explicitly to not be understood the first time. Kant just seems to be saying you won't understand it the first time, but that's because...
Is that an agreed upon thing? That he wrote it the first time in a way that was meant to not be well understood? Is that agreed upon?
I can't point to where I read that, but I'm pretty sure that is was his yep. Yes.
I was to a professor, and he said some people think, and so I was wondering if he was wrong that it's a fact. But from what it sounded like, yeah, some people think that it was written in a way to make to be more difficult on purpose, and I have a hard time believing that.
Well, the problem is that
I guess.
I mean, part of it could just be he's just not very good at writing, so he just had to accept that he was just going to say some shit that didn't make sense early in the book, and it would just make sense after you read the whole thing and came back to it. I mean, he definitely does indicate towards things that are definitely later in the book, and he does that early on in the book.
Yes, foreshadowing.
The kind of catch-22 there is I couldn't really tell you how much it was written that way until I've read it a bunch. If you get what I'm saying.
Well, I don't think you would still be able to intuit whether it was on purpose. It could just be habit. Or he could be retarded by habit.
I could tell you there was a huge difference between how he wrote when he wrote previously, before his philosophical days when he was doing theology. Like, it moved. He's like, this is the theme. This is the thing I'm going to be arguing, and then he'll like bounce through a bunch of different things and be like, see, and it's like linear. It makes sense as you're going forward. You're not fucking lost the whole time. And I'm also pretty sure he's very much at the very least, he definitely does think that the way that truth works is it's never linear. You're constantly reworking what the truth is, and I wish I could point out to it. Now, I wouldn't put it past him to do that because I also definitely, at least Nietzsche explicitly says in Beyond Good and Evil, he says, I literally wrote this obscurely so that dumb people couldn't read it.
You know what? And it's not far out of bounds because in philosophy, there's a shit ton of gatekeeping, and fuck philosophers for that shit. And the epitome of a philosopher is literally, you know, a philosopher, author. Um, yeah, so I mean, it's completely believable. And you know what? I hate it so much. I want to blame him for where we're at with the world because if it was legible, maybe more people would be reasonable. You know, they'd work
But
from
then
pure
they
reason.
wouldn't get the point that truth is iterative and it's not linear.
Well, they're not getting anything right now. They're all dumb because they don't read.
You're right.
You know, you gotta get them to the water.
It could also be that literally. It could be so maybe it's not that he just felt like being an asshole, but because he genuinely does believe, as Kant seems to be indicating here about himself, that you can't actually express the truth linearly. You can only actually grasp what's going on once you, or like you can only grasp particulars or like actual statements being said once you have a grasp of the concept of the whole. In which case, you can't actually start reading the book and grasp the particular things being stated until you have read the whole book.
I just want you to just say plainly in English that it was written badly. His concepts couldn't be conveyed any other way than in a convoluted manner.
I think that's what it be. That might be what it is.
You don't believe that.
I kind of believe that.
I mean, you want to believe that. It'd be really cool.
I want to believe that that's his intention, but I don't really believe.
Like, I could go through the spark notes for the book, understand the concept, get all of it in my brain, and I guess I want to bet it'd be linear.
Yeah, in a similar way.
Notes aren't written in a similar retarded fashion, out of order and 12 commas. Like, sorry guys, we're just these spark notes to be able to convey the concept. We have to write this way.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I do think he did believe that was the case when he was writing it. I don't know. I mean, also, in a lot of ways, I wonder to what extent he hadn't even really worked out the whole thing when he was writing it, and he was working it out as he was writing it. So that's what you get.
That would be perfectly aligned, right? Because a lot of these people that have full systems, right, you don't even realize when you're building such a big system and you're doing it on fucking 1700s paper. It's not like you're going back and you're checking a whole lot. You're not like control Fing, I mean, and then rewriting sections. I'm gonna guess this is the first time you're putting it all on paper, and if it's all in your head before that, and now you're building out a system. Only then, when you put it in words and start to build out examples, when you're writing things down like that for a book, you don't even realize there are parts of things you're saying or thinking that, when put in, long form writing, have implications.
Yeah, like, could you imagine if you had to write, like, all of your code on paper, and you couldn't, like, bounce around and be like, oh, that doesn't work, let me go back and tweak that, and then move back to what I was doing before. Like, he was literally right. Both of these writers were writing this on paper, which is insane to me. I don't know how they did that shit. My hand cramps up after one page of writing stuff. Physically, yeah. I don't know how they did it, and also, I guess.
Well, I mean, I don't know about you, but like, it wasn't that long ago. I even remember in my house, I had growing up, I had like an original typewriter